We're in week 6 fantasy football, which means we're dealing with a lot of tough lineup decisions between both injuries and bye weeks here. So we're making start-sit decisions that are usually more uncomfortable to make, but I've got 7 players that I just feel like they're going to unleash in week 6 fantasy football, and they're must-starts this week. So make sure to go down there, drop a like on the video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support, because I'm doing everything I can to get us ready for week 6. So let's go to our first running back here. I've got Breece Hall as a must-start this week. He would not normally be a must-start guy because obviously he was a first-round pick in drafts. Most of the time, you're not going to sit Breece Hall. But obviously, the last several weeks, Breece Hall has not been good. That's been a big problem with Breece Hall, is he has not seen the volume and he has just not been efficient on his work. So a lot of his fantasy points are just evaporating right before our very eyes. So what makes him a must start this week against the Buffalo Bills on Monday night? There's several factors. Obviously, they fired their head coach, Robert Saleh, over there in New York just earlier this week. There's a lot of chaos going on in that building right now. That's not a great thing, but there is a big problem here that was well beyond Robert Saleh because he's a defensive coach. The big problem right now with Breece Hall has been with Nathaniel Hackett. Their offensive coordinator is atrocious. He's not running the ball the last 2 weeks. He has been demoted this week, and now the quarterback coach, Todd Downing, is going to be calling the plays. Now, I don't know if he's going to be run first here, but here's the thing that the Jets need to remember, and I've been saying this all week. The Jets are 2-1 when Breece Hall gets at least 14 carries and 5 targets. This is a guy they just need to find a way to feed because that's going to win them games. I believe that there's going to be a major emphasis on Breece Hall this week, also in part because the Bills are dead last against running backs as far as points allowed goes. They got crushed by Derrick Henry a couple weeks ago. They just got ran over by Dare Ogunbowale and Cam Akers last week for the Houston Texans. The Bills are very susceptible to the run, and I think that Breece Hall has his resurgence week this week. Now, our next guy right here is our wide receiver, Jakobi Meyers of the Las Vegas Raiders. He's taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers at home this week. So obviously with the Las Vegas Raiders, they're going through a lot of issues themselves right now. This is not an exactly well-run team at the moment. They're having lots of coaching issues with Antonio Pierce. They're having lots of personnel issues, lots of guys missing. They just benched Gardner Minshew for Aiden O'Connell this week. So what is the difference between Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew for Jakobi Meyers' upside? So last year with Aiden O'Connell, Jakobi Meyers was averaging 5 targets per game. And keep in mind, that is with Davante Adams. That was with Davante Adams in the lineup that he was averaging 5 targets per game. Now you take Davante Adams out of the equation, and the last 2 weeks he's averaging basically 10 targets per game. That's what we're seeing with Jakobi Meyers so far, is his targets per game have just gone through the roof. And they're really good targets with Aiden O'Connell in particular because he is more of a short thrower guy. He doesn't have the biggest arm. He's not launching it down the field. He's not a cowboy like Gardner Minshew is, and he's just willing to take shots. That's not Aiden O'Connell's game. He's trying to slice you up over the middle. He's a more cerebral player trying to do that with a lot of dink and dunks, actually. So this is a good PPR play because the Steelers just got sliced up the last 2 weeks by Josh Downs and Michael Pittman in week 4 versus the Colts, and they got sliced up by Jalen Tolbert last week on Sunday night. And this is actually a very sustainable thing because the problem the Steelers are experiencing right now is their pass rush is weaker. Their pass rush is missing 2 pass rushers this week again. Alex Highsmith is out again, opposite of TJ Watt, and their backup to Alex Highsmith, Nick Herbig, is out as well. And the backup to the backup is actually out as well. So they have very little pass rushing upside if they cannot get TJ Watt going, which allows for more time for Aiden O'Connell to find Jakobi Meyers. Now, Jakobi Meyers did miss Wednesday's practice, but he's reportedly going to be fine for this game, so I'm not worried about Jakobi Meyers. But just in case Jakobi Meyers can't go, I'm going even deeper here, and I think that Jalen Tolbert is a very, very good start this week versus the Detroit Lions here. So this is one of the highest over-unders of the week according to Vegas here. They're expecting a lot of points. I'm expecting a lot of points out of both teams here. And the reason why is because when you look at what the Detroit Lions have done defensively, what they're really good at is against the run. What they're really weak at is they're really weak against the pass. That has been their weakness the entire season of fantasy football. So when you look at Jalen Tolbert as a player, he has been their real wide receiver 2 since week 2. Even with Brandon Cooks still there, Jalen Tolbert's actually been playing 70% of the snaps at least since week 2. And he's been getting good games in between there and then. So when you take out Brandon Cooks last week, obviously he's on the IR, so Jalen Tolbert is now officially the number 2 wide receiver. He was in on 89% of the snaps against the Pittsburgh Steelers. He was rarely taken off the field for the Dallas Cowboys, and he had 10 targets last week against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And here's the good thing about these 10 targets, right? He's not running just deep routes. This is not just a deep shot to take, and that's exactly the player that Jalen Tolbert used to be when he was in college and in the early years with Dallas. He's actually running a full route tree for the Dallas Cowboys. He's going over the middle, he's going for shorter routes, he's going on curl routes. This guy is doing a little bit of everything for the Dallas Cowboys here. So again, while the Lions are 3rd in rushing yards allowed, they're 25th in points versus wide receivers. They are not good defending opposing wide receivers, and the Dallas Cowboys are simply just going to need to throw the ball to keep this game close and to keep a part of the shootout that is definitely bound to happen. So I've got Jalen Tolbert as a really good play this week. And going down to our running back right here, this is a little bit more of a deep shot, and I'm taking Tyrone Tracy Jr. to have another big game versus the Cincinnati Bengals. Last week was a breakout party for Tyrone Tracy Jr. It was awesome to watch. I've got a lot of confidence in it happening again. Because here's the thing, when you look at what he did last week, he had 18 carries, he had 2 targets. The targets didn't really go anywhere, but on the 18 carries, he had 129 yards. Versus the Seattle Seahawks, mind you, that's 7.2 yards per carry. This defense with Seattle is much better, even injured, than the Cincinnati Bengals defense is. And when you actually just look at the 2 players, he's just a more explosive player than Devin Singletary is at this point of his career. He was actually getting praise from Brian Daboll, who is typically not a praise-heavy guy when it comes to the media. He was getting the praise from Brian Daboll. He liked what he saw from him in week 5. So what's Devin Singletary's status this week? Well, he was limited on both Wednesday and Thursday's practice. So chances are good he's going to need to log a full practice on Friday for him to be able to go here. If he has another limited practice, he very well could miss the next game. But my thing is, if he's not 100%, why would the Giants rush him back out there? This is just not a situation where they absolutely have to have Devin Singletary because he's just so much better than Tyrone Tracy. No. Tyrone Tracy, obviously we just ran through the numbers, is a really good player and was doing the job in week 5 when his number was called. And on top of that, Malik Neighbors missed his 2nd straight practice of the week on Thursday. So this guy looks increasingly unlikely to play again for the New York Giants. They're going to have to run the ball in this game. And the Bengals are 21st in points allowed to running backs. And overall, they're just not a very good defense to where I could actually see if Tyrone Tracy gets a couple more targets, him having a better week catching the football too. And last week he didn't get in the end zone. I think it could happen this week. I love Tyrone Tracy Jr. if Devin Singletary does not go. Now our wide receiver here, this one may seem more obvious, but I've got Chris Godwin at the New Orleans Saints as a absolute must start. Now again, this is not for everybody who's in like a 12-team league or 14 or 16-team league. Obviously, if you have Chris Godwin in a deeper league, you're going to be playing Chris Godwin regardless of the matchup here. But if you're talking 8-team leagues and 10-team leagues where you've got several options at wide receiver this week, Chris Godwin needs to find his way into your lineup this week. With Chris Godwin, the last 2 games have been disappointing. Again, it's a very similar experience to what Breece Hall has given you, except not as bad as what Breece Hall has given you. So there's been a little bit of doubt this week. I've seen a lot of questions, more than I expected, come through about Chris Godwin. Should I play him this week? Should I not play him? I really like Chris Godwin in this game. He has 8 targets per game still on the entire year. Even in those bad games the last 2 weeks, he's still averaging a bunch of targets on a per game basis here. The Saints are 22nd in points allowed to the wide receiver position, and there's one major reason why Chris Godwin absolutely getting in your lineup makes a ton of sense to me. Mike Evans, his worst games over his entire career have been against Marshawn Lattimore, the New Orleans Saints starting cornerback. That is when Mike Evans plays his worst. In fact, he has gotten kicked out of the game more than once versus the New Orleans Saints because Marshawn Lattimore lives rent-free in Mike Evans' head. So they're going to take him out of the game. And in fact, if you want proof, Mike Evans, one game since 2021 has had more than 10 fantasy points in a half PPR format. What about Chris Godwin? Chris Godwin's had one game with fewer than 10 fantasy points against the New Orleans Saints since 2021. All the focus goes to Mike Evans for the New Orleans defense, so they take him out of the game, leaving Chris Godwin open for a bunch of targets and a bunch of really high-quality opportunities from Baker Mayfield this week. I love playing Chris Godwin this week. He should not find his way to your bench this week. Now, going down to our quarterback and tight end must-starts, I've got Caleb Williams at the quarterback position here. Caleb Williams, I think, is going to continue his role versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, and it's an overseas game on Sunday morning, so make sure to have your lineup set on Saturday night so you do not miss this one. Because Caleb Williams, if you're struggling at quarterback with injuries or just because your quarterback's on a bye week, I think Caleb Williams is going to be a good play this week. 2 straight games, he's thrown less than 30 balls. That doesn't sound very good in fantasy football, right? But what it did is it improved his efficiency to a major level. 73.9% completion percentage in week 4 and a 69 completion percentage rating in week 5. He is completing so many more of his passes than he was earlier on in the season, throwing less passes. Now, in week 4, it didn't turn out to a good fantasy week. He only had 11.5 fantasy points in that game, but he had 23.6 fantasy points last week against the Carolina Panthers. So with this matchup here against the Jacksonville Jaguars, they are dead last in points versus the quarterback position here. They are absolutely bleeding points to the quarterback position, and he's got all of his weapons again this week. I love the fact that he's got all of his wide receivers. His running back, DeAndre Swift's taking pressure off of him. This defense stinks. I think Caleb Williams is in line for another great week. And Cade Otton at the tight end position is going to be a must start, in my opinion. This is if you have tight end injuries or tight end bye weeks here. I think Cade Otton's a really good fill in this week against New Orleans Saints in New Orleans here. So with Cade Otton, the last 3 weeks, he's actually averaging 7 targets per game. That's a pretty high number at the tight end position. Now, obviously, it hasn't turned out to a major fantasy week, but obviously, at the tight end position, you kind of got to take what you can get, and especially if you can find a guy who's getting a lot of targets, this is the type of guy that you want to go for. Because as I said earlier with Mike Evans, they're going to take him out of this game. He will become a major non-factor to a certain extent because of the Marshawn Lattimore factor. New Orleans is also 23rd against tight ends in fantasy football this year. And Rachaad White is still banged up for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So they're probably going to need to throw the ball more than they're going to have to run, as it has been throughout the entire season for Tampa Bay, because they can't run the football very well. So you take out their number 1 receiver, at least to an extent. You've got Chris Godwin and you've got Cade Otton, because their other receivers behind those two are either injured or not very good. I really like Cade Otton this week if you need to fill in at the tight end spot. So let me know how your lineup looks this week, and if you want to see the top 30 running backs for this week, click on this video right here.